Well, good morning again, everyone. Something interesting this morning, hopefully for you. In fact, in preparation for this discussion this morning, I went back and pulled out my autobiography, which I wrote and completed about, 5 or 6 years ago. And this is what it looks like. I've sent copies of this to my children. I have not sent copies to the grandchildren. It's a little expensive. They're probably about $10, $12, $15 a piece at this point in time. I've got 20 grandchildren. So if you or my friends have an interest in getting a copy of this, send me a note, give me an email, and I will hold off until I hear from a number of you, and then go down and place an order for one of these for you. This brings up until just recent years here in St. George. But what I had in mind today was reading to you the next important thing that happened to me in my life, which is of a spiritual nature. And I wrote these out in my autobiography under Spiritual Experiences, Chapter 6. And so I'm going to read, this could also be called The Voice, and that may be what I will put it on YouTube as The Voice, or the Astonishing Voice. So that's what I'm going to try and read and see if it goes well. If it's not a good way to proceed, then I won't access it anymore. I'll just talk off the top of my head as I have been doing so far. This starts out with my move to Boise, which goes back a little from our last video. I moved to Boise to join my mother and brother when I was in the 8th grade. Even from that point, attendance at church was still more or less dutiful, being encouraged by my mother. I remember attending the Methodist church meetings located on 10th Street and State Street, yet they were of no real significance to me. I stopped going when I was about 13. I remember once, out of curiosity, attending a Christmas Mass at the Catholic Church in Boise. There was no communication going on at that time between myself and my Father in heaven. No engagement in prayer, or a real sense that He, God, was of significance to me. I was kind of ignoring Him, going it alone. And this continued throughout my adolescent years until I was about 20, stationed on the Coast Guard cutter Escanaba in Oakland, California, and that I referred to in my last video with you. I was at a very spiritual low, an emotional low, the lowest point of my life. I was depressed. Life was empty, without purpose. I was seriously questioning whether it was worth living or not. I contemplated suicide. I was seriously questioning whether it was worthwhile living or not. At that time, there had been 97 people who had killed themselves by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. I remember thinking that number 100 was going to be a big event. At the same time, the thought scared me. I decided that before pursuing that alternative, I would first make some sort of an effort to find out the answers to why do we live? What happens after death? What's life all about anyway? Is there any real significance or meaning to it? I thought these questions might be answered by going to various religious meetings in the Bay Area. Thus began my personal quest. I attended a revival meeting in the Oakland auditorium. As I sat there, the minister began to implore the people to come forward and be saved. I sensed that, yes, I wanted to be saved, to accept Christ as my Savior. The desire was not overwhelming, but it was there. So I mustered up some courage and went forward with a group of some 30 or 40 people. I remember that after the meeting was over, we were asked to come back into a private room. I sat down with what must have been a religious counselor, and he asked me if I believed in Jesus Christ. I said, "Yes, I think I do." I did not amplify much beyond that point. He said, "Well, you're saved." And I said, "Is that all?" He said, "Yes, that's all." And I can remember walking back out through the auditorium, up the aisle, feeling extremely disappointed, empty, and defrauded by the experience. I attended 6 or 7 other churches in the Berkeley area: Presbyterian, Lutheran, Congregational, Baptist. In each case, I derived very little from my visits to them. However, during this period of time, something very important happened to me. One of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life. I had gone home to Portland, Oregon to be with my family for Christmas during 1948. My experience there was fairly negative. I sensed my alienation from them. I was not close to them, nor did I share with them the things that were important to them, which was primarily the LDS Church, which my mother had joined after she married my stepfather. During that visit, I dated a Mormon girl who lived, Joyce Murray, I'll mention her name, who lived in Portland. I can remember sitting in the car talking with her. I don't remember the things we talked about, blowing cigarette smoke in her face all evening during that date. She must have had a strong constitution to be able to endure that type of date. But she was very nice, a warm person, and she listened to me. That impressed me, her goodness and her kindness. I got drunk riding back on the bus to my ship in Oakland after that Christmas vacation. Boarding the ship, I got some sleep before going on watch the next evening. So I was sober by that next evening, completely sober. I just want to mention that because it's significant in terms of what happens. That night, I had to stand watch in the boiler room. I was a boilerman. From midnight till 4 a.m. That's the midnight watch, we call it, which would be January the 1st, 1949. I had a hangover. I felt tired, irritable. I relieved the man who had been on duty. He left. And so there was no one else down in that area, the boiler room, when what happens next takes place. I was standing all alone behind the control board of the boilers, in front of the boilers, and reaching with my right hand into my left upper shirt pocket to pull out the pack of cigarettes that I habitually carried with me. I reached in, took hold of the pack, when a voice distinctly, clearly, came from outside of myself, and it came from in front of me, about 6 feet away, and there was just a wall there, a bulkhead. Just a wall. Nothing between me and it. Nobody else around. And the voice said, "You have had the last cigarette that you will ever have." And then it continued, "You have had the last drink that you will ever have." My hand dropped from my pocket. I was astonished, because it was not my thought. It was not some internal resolution. The voice was external, clear, decisive, and powerful. I could even sense its location, as I've indicated to you, in front of me, about 6 feet away, at about the same level. I could hear this voice coming to me, and nobody there, nobody standing there. I was shaken and confused. I took the cigarette pack from my pocket, proceeded to crumple it in my hand, and dumped it into an ash can, or a trash can that was there. I sensed that something powerful was happening, something totally different from what I had ever experienced before in my life. I stood there, reflecting on what I had heard for a few minutes. Then I went up onto the main deck of the ship, calling it topside. It was midnight, New Year's Eve. I stood there on the deck in the cold, clear air while the whistles, church bells, and car horns in the city of Oakland began to sound, signaling in the new year of 1949. As I stood there, I sensed that my life was changing, that somehow something was taking place that was deeply significant. I thought, what would my life be like in a year? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It was difficult, impossible for me to project ahead, to envision what those years might be like. But I knew, as I stood there, that my life would not be the same, that something profound was taking place. And that event signaled a close to my drinking and smoking habits. I never smoked or drank alcohol again. That chapter was closed in my life. A voice: "You have had the last cigarette that you'll ever have. You have had the last drink that you will ever have." I don't know who that voice came from. One of my ancestors, a guardian spirit, an angel sent by God, Jesus Christ himself. I doubt that. Not impossible. But there was no question in my mind from there on that God is there, and that I was acceptable enough to him at that point in time, perhaps because of my having gone to Oakland, California some years before, several years before, and taking care of unfinished business. But that event, that voice, changed my life. And what happens next is just as significant as what happened to me at the time of that voice. Seek and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened to you.